All right, let's get into this. First, I just want to start with just sort of the basis of this. I've had half a dozen people I know, friends, I guess you refer to them as, who have contacted me with the exact same question. They're mostly friends, but there are people who are like sort of more acquaintances because I get, in situations like this, I hear from a lot of people. What are you telling your kids? Because my daughter on Friday texted me during the show, are we going into World War III? And I thought, all right, this is my daughter. She's just a little bit anxious. And apparently, like, all the kids are freaking out. All the kids. Some kids who are like 7, some kids who are 6, some kids who are 14. And I saw this thing. And so, I immediately, I search it to see, like, is there any psychiatrists or psychologists who are putting out stuff? And there's some, and it's sort of generic, but there was one in Time magazine. How to talk to your kids about the situation with Iran. And frankly, I didn't find it terribly helpful. And then I found it really despicable in some respects. And I don't know who wrote this. I don't have it at the top of my page now, so I don't care. Who cares? Why don't the U.S. and Iran get along? The U.S. and Iran have a difficult relationship. It's been this way for many years. Now, for anybody who knows a respectable amount of history, like, let's say, someone who is a journalist who's writing in a magazine about the topic of why don't the U.S. and Iran get along, you would know that really you would start this probably in the early 50s. When it's possible you go before then, but I think, like, in terms of the modern era, when the CIA basically orchestrated a coup to get rid of Moghadesh, who was the Iranian president, prime minister, and was a little bit too socialistic-y for the United States. They were a little worried about his oil. And so they engaged in a coup, got rid of him, replaced him with the Shah, who turned out to be rather dictatorial and oppressive and a king. And then ultimately exiled this guy, Ayatollah Khomeini, in a way to sort of like tamp down, I guess, any type of religious, and not just fervor, but any type of like social structures that would compete with his dictatorial regime. And because the United States was so closely associated with the Shah, gave him support, material support, obviously put him into office, if you want to call it office. That takes us up to where Time magazine starts. In 1979, Iran took 52 American diplomats and citizens hostage. They were released after 44 days. So it's been this way for many years. In 1979, Iran, that's where it started. Just like, wow, that's weird of Iran. Why would they do that?
Not cool, guys.
Not cool. Just randomly do this?
Totally unprovoked.
Okay. So we've established we cannot tell our kids, look, and listen, I'm going to try and be as sort of gentle about this as possible. Back in the old days, put aside for a moment Venezuela and what's going on in Bolivia and et cetera, et cetera. Back in the old days, we would interfere with other countries' governments, and what we did was wrong. And then it took 25 years to metastasize, and they ended up there was a revolution there, and because of the United States rule and its the symbolism, they held 50 some odd of our diplomats hostage. And after a year and a half, they released them. Now, We're not going to get into little Solly. I'm not going to get into the role that Ronald Reagan played in keeping them in there, and some other powerful interest that actually kept them in there as a way of leveraging an election. We'll talk about that when you get a little older.
The fact that we sold chemical weapons to Saddam while he was gassing them.
Exactly. Well, that comes a little later. That comes later. And then they just go from 1979 to 2018. Tensions increased again after President Trump said the U.S. would no longer participate in a 2015 deal with Iran. Well, at least they got that. Now, no longer participate is really not the right word, but okay. This international agreement, in other words, this international agreement set strict limits for 15 years on Iran's ability to create nuclear weapons. In return, the U.S. and countries in the European Union agreed to end trade restrictions. In other words, they decided to not starve the country. When Trump pulled out of the agreement, the U.S. put trade restrictions back in place. This has hurt Iran's economy. So, in other words, I understand that you're too young to understand that it's making people, sicker and hungrier and poorer. But I'm just going to use the word economy because you're 6. That presentation of history by a writer at Time magazine, whomever it is, and maybe it's some 22-year-old who has no idea of the history and they can't go further back than 1979 because that's ages ago. And they couldn't be bothered to Google because people are writing about it all the time anyways. That is why we have this sort of like complete credulity. Why we have a press that right now will go after Sanders and Warren and Corbyn and anybody who hesitates or says the word assassinate or doesn't say the word terrorist when we're talking about Soleimani. If Soleimani is a terrorist for killing, just by the nature of being a general, because he is a general in a military, and he has no doubt killed hundreds, if not, I would imagine as a general, like you're not doing your job if you're not killing thousands and you've been engaged in war. I don't know how many civilians he's killed. He's certainly probably been responsible, at least as a general is, for the killing of U.S. Military personnel. But there was a piece in the Times reminding people of what happened in 1988 when the Navy warship, the Vincennes, was chasing after an Iranian warship and went into Iranian coastal space. And apparently, the guy who was running that warship, I don't know what you call him, captain, I guess, guy named Rogers, saw an airliner that was coming. Now, they say they accidentally shot it down, an Iranian airliner. It killed 290 civilians, 65 of whom were children. A subsequent study of this by the Navy found that none of the things that Rogers claimed were the case with this airliner happened. That it was outside of commercial airline lanes. It was in commercial airline lanes. It was the Vincennes that was disoriented. The idea that it was diving towards the Vincennes also found to be not true. The idea that it didn't have communications, also not true. They were so trigger happy, they shot this thing down and killed 300 Iranian civilians. Now, I want folks to contemplate what we did when non-state actors attacked our country and killed 3,000 civilians. We went into war for 18 years in 2 different countries. We killed hundreds of thousands of people. Hundreds of thousands of people. Soleimani apparently oversaw the Quds attempt to blow up the car of the wife of the Vincennes captain in Washington, D.C. She survived. This goes back and forth. If we're going to assassinate, if it's on the table that we can assassinate people who represent a potential challenge to the United States or a potential threat to our military personnel, the list is going to be endless. And if we can do that, then other countries can do that. And that endless list will include a lot of our top officials too. This is why it's not done. This is why we don't go around and assassinate leaders anymore. At least not publicly. At least not in such a way that we're bragging about it. Because it's incredibly destabilizing. And to do so with absolutely no reason. And why do I say we have no reason? Because we have heard not a reason from our government, but like multiple ones that are inconsistent with each other. Let's start with reason number 1 that we did this, given to us by Mike Pompeo this Sunday. And when I say this, I mean assassinate Soleimani. Look, Soleimani is a piece of crap. Just like in the same way that every military person is a piece of crap.
Yeah, and I want to flip that just really quickly. You could either say that's completely fair and valid, or you could just say, like, and maybe we'll play it later, what General McChrystal said, which we played last night, which I think he's a patriot. I think he has his own, patriotism, and he's fighting for his country. Of course, just like I am.
McChrystal said it.
Well, exactly. Because he has the self-awareness to recognize that they're the same thing.
Yes.
And if we're going to have all this melodrama, we either need to decide that this is collectively wrong across the board or not have the melodrama.
Right. Is this McChrystal here?
The political
okay. Here's McChrystal saying that
this is important.
I don't think we should view him as an evil person. I think we should view him just like I believe in my country. I think Qasem Soleimani believes in his country. Just as I would propagate, the aims of mine, he would do his.
Yeah, all right, so there's the bottom line. Now, of course, McChrystal's going to say this because McChrystal doesn't want to be held to the same standard where he could be assassinated either. Right? I mean, that's why McChrystal wants to be able to go on to the board of whatever, Grantham Northup or Raytheon or whoever he is.
Teach at Yale.
Or whatever it is, wherever he's making all his cash from some military, the military industrial complex. He wants to be able to do that without having a fear that he can be assassinated. So, of course, he's going to go out there and say that. And fine. God bless him. But here's Mike Pompeo on Fox News Sunday describing we've got to make this into an imminent attack, right? I'm trying to think what this reminds me of. Let's not let the smoking gun be a mushroom cloud. But here is Mike Pompeo spreading the oldest lie in the book.
President Trump says that General Soleimani was planning a, quote, imminent attack against Americans. You have said it was a, quote, big action that could potentially kill hundreds of American diplomats and soldiers. What was the plan? Who were the targets and how soon?
Yes, President Trump was right in what he said, so was I. We'll share all the intelligence that we can. I was the CI director for a little while, Chris. There's things we simply cannot make public about what it is we knew at that time and what, in fact, we know today about the continuing activity. think General Milley got it right when he said we would have been culpably negligent had we not gone after Soleimani when we had the opportunity. He was actively engaged in plotting against American interests. We need to look no further than what he had personally done over the days before that, where an American was killed on December 27th. There's no surprise. There's plenty of public evidence about the bad behavior of Qasem Soleimani. He was a designated terrorist, and we did the right thing.
Okay, so you see how it just even over the course of his answer, it evolved. First of all, it's a potential that could kill a lot of Americans. American diplomats, a potential. Well, there was potential last night when they lobbed those missiles, but they knew what they were doing. They didn't do it. Soleimani had responded to the killing of 25 Iranian militia people from the day before. They've been going back and forth, tit for tat. So if Pompeo's the killing of one U.S. contractor, and I don't want anybody to die, but if that becomes the litmus test as to whether you can assassinate a military personnel, well then whoever ordered the bombing that killed the 25 Iranians, well, aren't they subject now to the same thing? But that is the argument on day 1. Let's go to day 4 and listen to what Mike Esper, the Secretary of Raytheon, of the Department of Defense of Raytheon, has to say that it wasn't so much that there was an imminent attack. It was more like that it was, well, here.
Jeff Showler. Thank you. Can you clarify, the attack Soleimani was planning, was that days or weeks away?
I think it's more fair to say days, for sure.
And is the U.S. legally obliged to withdraw from Iraq if told by the Iraqi government to go?
I'm not going to speculate. We're not there yet. There's been none of that has happened to the best of my knowledge. And as those events unfold, we'll address them and we'll have all the right legal experts.
Now, of course, saying days or weeks, here's something that I think hopefully you don't have to be an English major to understand. That I could live to the ripe old age of 110, and that will be still days away. We are now on day 5 of the attack that apparently was so imminent, so planned. Everything was there. Like, are we really to believe that the Iranian government doesn't have somebody who can step in and go like, oh yeah, that attack that was planned, do it. We're 5 days away. If we can't say weeks.
It meant that, the attack on the credibility of the president to wage war on behalf of the Gulf states was at stake. Because he was going to Iraq. Like, it's really important to, look, if there's contradictory reporting that comes out, we'll follow it. But as far as we know, based off of senior Iraqi politicians and the fact that he was traveling on a commercial airliner, every indication is that this specific trip was a diplomatic initiative to back channel to Saudi Arabia
supposedly
through
started
Iraq.
by Trump. That was supposedly started by Trump by what he said to the Iraqi prime minister. But here's Pompeo on that same day having a different concept of what imminent means. For Mike Esper, imminent means days away, even though he was days away from when Soleimani was killed. When he said that, Pompeo has a slightly different take on imminent. Imminent has to do with what has actually already taken place. Here we go.
Finally, there's been much made about this question of intelligence and imminence. I answered it multiple times on Sunday. I'm happy to walk through it again. Anytime a president makes a decision of this magnitude, there are multiple pieces of information that come before us. We presented that to him in all its broad detail. We gave him all the best information that came not only from the intelligence community, but for those of us who have teams in the field. We evaluated the relevant risks and the opportunity that we thought might present itself at some point. And we could see clearly that not only had Soleimani done all of the things that we have recounted, right? Hundreds of thousands, a massacre in Syria, enormous destruction of countries like Lebanon and Iraq, where they've denied them sovereignty, and the
Pause it. I just want to note something, that he is actually saying that one of the black marks against Soleimani is the destruction he wreaked in Iraq.
Also, like the Fox News article from a couple days ago of the chart being like, Iran spends a lot of money on defense expenditure while their people suffer economic consequences.
Countries like Lebanon and Iraq, where they've denied them sovereignty, and the Iranians have really denied people in those two countries.
Pause it. And incidentally, also denying of sovereignty. There's a lot of people who say that you are infringing upon our sovereignty for bombing us to assassinate somebody else.
In Syria, enormous destruction of countries like Lebanon and Iraq, where they've denied them sovereignty, and the Iranians have really denied people in those two countries what it is they want, right? Sovereignty, independence, and freedom. This is all Soleimani's handiwork. And then we'd watch as he was continuing the terror campaign in the region. We know what happened at the end of last year in December, ultimately leading to the death of an American. So if you're looking for imminence, you needn't look no further than the days that led up to the strike that was taken against Soleimani. And then you, in addition to that, have what we could clearly see were continuing efforts on behalf of this terrorist to build out a network of campaign activities that were going to lead potentially to the death of many more Americans.
They keep throwing that word potentially in there because, really anything has the potential to kill Americans, right? Like, I did an ad for, a hot dog today. You could choke on it. Potentially has the ability to harm an American. They keep saying the word potential in there, which you wouldn't need to say that unless you were trying to provide yourself some measure of wiggle room in case you ever, anybody ever blew the whistle on this. You wouldn't need to say potential, because potential is embedded in the fact of anything that has that has not happened yet. It has the potential for anything to happen. And so the idea that we can look at the word imminence, which is the state or fact of being about to happen, that evidence of something about to happen is stuff that happens prior to stuff about to happen, is absurd. It's absurd. This is just jibber jabbish. Does anybody think that if there was any substantial threat to U.S. interests, that these guys would be hesitant to put it out there? I mean, give me a break. This is a joke. Donald Trump, for whatever reason, these lunatics thought this would be a good idea. And here's the point. There's no operational value to this. There's no one who's out there making the case that in any way this is going to save lives. There's no one out there saying that, now that Soleimani is no longer general, there's no more generals in the Iranian army. Now that Soleimani is not the general, there's no more coordination of militias, franchisees. No one's even bothering to make that case. No one's even bothering to make the dumb argument that Americans are safer today. Well, it's absurd. It's absurd. It's an absurd argument to make. No one's even bothering trying to do it. They're just saying this. We brought this guy to justice. This guy who we hadn't even mentioned for years. That the vast majority of Americans had no idea about. This guy who was a military general, and everybody knows that this is a function of deteriorating relationship with Iran that has been completely orchestrated and completely unnecessary. And even the fact that Iran could exercise some measure of discretion. Now, obviously, they don't want to get into a war with us, because while it will be a horror show for us, it will be a greater horror show for them. That's just the reality of it. And, the idea that there are people in the administration going, we finally got rid of Soleimani. It doesn't matter. It's not going to change the trajectory of history one iota. The idea that both countries, and I don't even mean the countries, I mean like the people. The idea that there are people in this country whose kids are texting them from school or coming home from school at 6 years old and say, we're going to have World War III. The idea that the amount of just sort of like anxiety that the people of this country, the people of Iran, the people of Iraq, who have suffered just relentlessly.
They're the ones who died last night, incidentally.
No, as far as I know, no one died.
I think Iraqi civilians have died.
According to the reports today, no one died. But the general notion that people need to live under this amount of anxiety, and frankly, it benefits both governments, right? I mean, it benefits the supreme leader, because now everybody's rallying around what was, sort of reform movements and protests that were taking place in Iran are now, of course, quashed and co-opted and subsumed because of a nationalism and a patriotism that happens when you get attacked.
Yeah,
and it helped Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is facing impeachment, and he thinks that it somehow makes him more masculine, or it achieves, whatever sort of slight of Obama he wanted to, or whatnot. It is all done at the expense of people. And this was my point about, sort of like, feeling somewhat anarchist sympathetic today. When you see the people in power who get value out of just putting us through this crap, both sets of leadership see value in putting us through this crap, this worthless, insane, never mind we want to talk about potential for killing American servicemen. Every action that Donald Trump and that Mike Pompeo put us through has the potential to kill American personnel and Iraqi personnel and Iranian personnel and people. It all has the potential for that. Potential for mass killings. So if that is the measure, then that guy should be subject to a legitimate assassination. And so this is all just, it's shocking.